Well, we've been through a lot together in this first series, haven't we? That is a lot in terms of a show about travelling animals going from one place to another can be, of course. In any case, there's so much to talk about this series that I couldn't fit it into the regular episodes. So in this episode, the Animals of Farthing Overview series episode, I'm going to take this entire episode to look over the story, the characters, the themes, and the animation. So let's go. The story, I feel, flows and moves at a very good pace. It moves slow enough so that a kid could follow it easily, but it's not too slow that an older viewer would become bored by it. It introduces itself in the perfect way, through the introduction of what will be the motivating factor for the characters. From this, we instantly know the threat that could befall them, and gives it a moment of dramatic irony as the characters figure out what we already know. But when we do meet the characters, they're smart enough to both recognise the threat and immediately decide to try and figure out a solution, making them smart from the get-go and likeable from the start, and makes us cheer for them because we know that they're smart enough and we like seeing smart characters and we want to see them get out of it alive. Unlike most modern horror movies where they would just introduce a bunch of unlikable pricks just to be killed off, and we feel no remorse for that because we don't care for them in the first place. But despite that though, they don't all get along, they do fight, they do disagree, and while they don't go completely violent with their differences, the way they make a stand and fight for their own rights, irritating as it can be sometimes, makes them seem very human. All of these elements create a scenario that seems very realistically played out for a human, but these are not humans, and that's what makes it interesting. The fact that these animals, wild animals, band together and work as a team towards a common goal that will benefit them and save their lives, and arguably doing it better than some humans would. This actually makes it a very intriguing story to watch, and while most of the human menace thing does come off as a bit preachy, sometimes the elements of the animals being more civilized than the humans is actually an interesting and somewhat subtle social and humanitarian commentary. This whole story actually does have a few surprising twists despite how simple it can be at times, and it takes full advantage of all of them. And though admittedly I can't say that I was actually believing what some of the twists were suggesting were going to be the outcome would be, I can't deny that it did pull me in to see what was going to happen before the inevitable does. For example, while we all know that Fox would return after his disappearance, we're not sure how, and we wonder if the group is going to be able to proceed without him and if they'll even still make it, especially with Toad's homing instinct problem. Although some story elements are just completely dropped after a few episodes, like Owl's ambition to be leader or Fox's lack of eagerness to return, and others just won't go away even after they've been resolved, like Rabbit's shame after the river incident, or Vole's power struggle with the bigger animals. Of course, the show is limited by the source material as, in terms of story, they were going for a complete adaptation, regardless of a few changes to some of the characters. But still, they could have at least tried to have some resolution, or have at least cut out the fat, even if it would have been minor. But still, I can't fault the show on doing a great adaptation and carrying it well to a media that has limitations with adapting a text like this. Besides, they wouldn't outright change any elements of the story completely until Series 3. Overall, for the introduction to a very long and complex story, and being a story to be enjoyed on its individual credits, it works superbly. And while it may leave you feeling like you're wanting more, or leave you with a small sense of dissatisfaction, well, that's what Series 2 is for. But regardless, this show works at its best when it's being viewed in its entirety. Individually, not so much, but it's still enjoyable. And now to talk about the characters of Farthing. Now we do have to be honest here that a lot of the characters, in all honesty, have a very small impact on the story as a whole and have very little development. So instead of talking about each individual character in its own segment, which would take forever, I'm going to take this time to discuss the minor characters in one collective segment. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's go from smallest to largest.
If I've said it once, I've said it 100 times. We smaller animals must stand up for our rights.
Well, the newts are the smallest characters to start this journey, and let's be honest here, they pretty much are created on the sole significance that they were supposed to be killed off. They pretty much fill the boots of any comedy relief character from every TV show or movie since the 1980s. They solely exist to be killed off. Although I will say on a slightly more off-topic note that this show, despite the fact that it has several characters and a few who are clearly here just to die, they don't make them ungodly unlikable like I mentioned earlier with the story elements. I really hate it when shows and movies do this, when they introduce characters that are meant to be killed off and it makes them ungodly unlikable, and then we get some sort of odd, sick, perverse pleasure out of seeing them die. This one makes them at least commendably likable, or just kind of bland, so that we see them die and we know that it's a bad thing, which I do like. It makes it so that these characters are all, for a lack of a better term, actual characters. But on the Newts, like I said, they don't really have any significant personality. They have a little bit of character in their voice acting, and, well, they have something of a protective nature over their child, who, by the way, doesn't even get a single line in the entire series. There's very, very little to them. In fact, like I said in the initial episode that they did die, I think they have less than 15 lines in that entire episode. But I can see why they did leave. I mean, they were the smallest characters in the group, and it would have made it very difficult for them to make it all the way. So on that note, I can see why it happened. And the very dark element of their deaths only being an implication makes it all the more daunting. The mice unfortunately fall into a similar feeling, though they at very least do have a little bit more of a personality. At least the husband does, in that he seems to be constantly without backbone, which in that he feels as if he's being pushed around and constantly made to do things by anybody bigger than him, which is essentially everybody, which is actually rather funny when you think about it. But in reality, that's also kind of Rabbit's character element, and he does that element a lot better than he does. His wife is even less interesting, having almost no influence on the story apart from where she gets pregnant, which is again only there so that we can have some characters to kill off, but at least this time it's a little bit more emotionally gripping because we actually get to know both of them and the kids before they die. Also, I can give mad respects to Male Mice Hair because he actually tried to chew through the wire of the snare of the young rabbit trap, so props to that one there. He tried to be a hero. Didn't work, but he did his best. Still, they have some interest in them in that they do have a few moments in a few episodes where they take the focus, and they do a good job of that. And I can give them credit that they're nowhere near as boring as the Shrews. The Shrews have almost no dialogue, which made sense for the Newts because they weren't going to be there long, but the Shrews make it all the way to the end. They have no personality whatsoever, and they have no importance to the entire story. The only purpose I can think of them being there is that it makes the whole group seem a lot bigger, which does make sense, though in fairness they also changed a lot of elements from the story in the book, where there was meant to be an entire group of mice, voles and shrews, and this one there's only 2 of each and maybe a few babies. Although admittedly in the book it seems that they were trying to take that element from the book, because at the beginning you can hear Weasel saying to the male shrew, "Bring your brothers." But I guess he didn't actually decide to do that because it's just him and his wife. And to be fair on both of the shrew character perspective and on changing elements from the books, having so many of them would have been difficult to write and give them their own individual character. But at the same time, if they're not going to do anything, what's the point in even keeping them alive? Or even on a more slightly harsh but more critical standpoint, what was the point in even having them there at all? There are more three-dimensional characters than them who are getting axed off by the end. So yeah, I don't mean to seem harsh, but the shrews almost have no purpose. Oh, Mr. Vole. I've been waiting all series to do this. Vole is a completely self-righteous, selfish, egotistical, punching above his own weight douchebag, and he's not likeable in the slightest. To me, anyway. He starts off at the beginning of the series having virtually no character, and about halfway through they introduce the thing that would define his character for the rest of the series. The fact that he continually tries to stick up for the smaller animals, but not in a heroic leader kind of way, but more in a I don't want to be considered not the leader kind of way. Its power struggle with Badger halfway through the series does have some legitimate concerns brought up, despite the annoyance about the whole thing, and it does make sense. And it makes it all the more satisfying to see this character have his comeuppance and how he realises what he did was wrong and he shouldn't do it again. So why does he do that 2 episodes later? He just does the exact same thing again and again and again. It gets irritating and it doesn't add anything to the story. And admittedly, being fair again, it's tried to give him his character his own more dimensions and his own identity, which I can commend the writers for on that level, but they could have gone a different direction than just reversing his entire character development. He could interject into big meetings and brought up different solutions that he could have thought of and as being more beneficial to the smaller animals, especially in the sense of being a representative in Parliament for the smaller animals in the group. That would have been a fantastic way of forwarding his character's development. Or if we wanted to go in a little bit more of a subjugated but still going forward with his character kind of way, he could have stuck up for Badger when he gets a lack of support during later in the series. But no, they just decide to do the exact same thing with his character because, hey, it worked the first time, so why don't we do it again? Vol was one of the few characters that I actually wish would die, but he didn't. And like I said in the last episode, I really wish Bill Murray from Caddyshack would have shown up and just blown him up with some C4. His mother is less annoying, but it also comes as being less developed for her character. She's just really the stereotypical old deaf woman who misinterprets things, though to be fair that doesn't have anything to do with slapstick with her, and she has never become an interference in the journey or the story, at least in a major sense, and occasionally, especially through her voice acting, her banter can actually be quite humorous. True, the stereotypical deaf woman thing's been done a million times, but it's always funny when you make her angry and always critical. That's funny. And it's how she does it in this show. So I can definitely give her that oversight and that she's at least more enjoyable than her son. The squirrels don't really have that much to their character. They do have a very high voice and they seem to be very energetic and speedy, and they often jump into situations they shouldn't do. And that makes them good as characters to help add meat to the gang, though it does come to having them be unfortunately underutilised and underdeveloped. Though they do occasionally have some of their moments of independence, like when they jump over the cars during the traffic jam. The hedgehogs are definitely a tricky character to pin down what exactly their centre is. They seem fairly underdeveloped through the first half of the series, much like most of the minor characters, but they become a little bit more fleshed out near the middle, torn between siding with the smaller animals or the larger ones, and about 3/4 of the way through the series they're officially on the side of Vol, with Mr. Hedgehog's repeated catchphrase of "I'll second that," and naturally a few episodes before their untimely demise, which I still consider one of the most gruesome deaths on the show, they naturally introduce the curl-up element of their character. It does seem a bit contrived to insert something like that so far into the series, but then again, considering that it is a normal trait for wild hedgehogs, I can't really blame them that much. The rabbits are definitely more unique of the minor characters. As I mentioned before, Mr. Rabbit has the paranoia personality element, an element commonly found in comic relief characters in the story to do with a long journey. And while it does sometimes get grating to having him listen to his constant whining and empty excuses of why he can't go on, speaking of which, what does he expect the train to do? Stop the entire thing to help him out? He does offer some comedy relief in how pathetic he can just be, and how he gets motivated on by either his wife, Weasel, or Adder, normally by threatening violence. Mrs. Rabbit is not quite as memorable as her husband, although she does provide the more straight man side to their double act that they provide. Although they do try to give her a catchphrase, as you may have noticed along the series, with her constant proclamation of "don't panic," which does get annoying at times, but it is understandable. Their kids never really listen to them and they're in constant danger, especially for something as timid and as vulnerable as a rabbit. So naturally you would probably say don't panic, because if a rabbit panics it just scatters. The kids never really do get that much screen time, and I'm pretty sure they never got any lines, although their son clearly takes a big scene in a few of the episodes, such as him being caught in the snare and then him being killed off near the end of the series, which is of course tragic, but like I say, easy come, easy go. Hare comes very, very close to being considered one of the major supporting characters, but while he does have a great enjoyable personality in being sort of the self-righteous jerk character, but one that can be enjoyed, he doesn't have that many chances to express that beyond the first episode where he brings up some legitimate concerns and seems to be the only one who isn't taken a fall by the whole White Deer Park thing. His wife, like most wives in the series, doesn't really do much other than make fun of Pheasant, which again comes to a resolution when he dies, but it doesn't really go anywhere after that, especially considering that happened so early on that it probably happened a bit too quickly. Overall, they're enjoyable characters in their own right, they're just not given that many chances to be great characters. But what do you expect when we have so many other characters, many of which are given time and attention that they don't need to be? It's only natural that some would end up getting shoved away. Mr. and Mrs. Pheasant are definitely two of the characters that you know are going to die by the second episode. They're kind of like the jock and cheerleader stereotype relationship that you see in most teen comedies and horror movies. Or if you really want to stretch it, from Daria. Which I guess is kind of okay, but it's also done in that sort of more refined British way and done a lot more comedic, which I guess that's really the best way I can describe them. Mr. Pheasant is extremely self-centered, lazy, cowardly, and completely self-absorbed and blind to the sacrifices that his wife makes for him. And Mrs. Pheasant is an extremely patient and almost subjugatingly timid trophy wife who clearly regrets her choice in life to settle down with her husband, though never admits it. From this, and especially considering what animals they are, you could tell they were going to die straight away. Although Mr. Pheasant's sudden character turnaround just before his death does make it a lot more daunting and a lot more emotional, though I wouldn't necessarily it makes up for everything he did to his wife throughout the series. And finally, of the minor characters, there would be Kestrel. She never really does anything to branch away from essentially her crow's nest duty of being the lookout and her annoying speech gag of how she continues to say screech at the beginning of every sentence, which does occasionally get a bit irritating. But she's just an interesting character through her voice acting, like many of the minor characters who have little personality but can still be enjoyed. And near the end of the series, we can see her getting rather fiery and worked up at Owl's constant snarky remarks and Weasel's constant jokes, which is actually quite enjoyable to see. But again, she's not very developed. But it wouldn't be until the next series until she got some major character development.
Sorry, can't oblige, old son. If you want me, you'll have to kill me first.
Fox can definitely be considered the central player in the whole series. As such, there's a lot to talk about with his character, so let's get right to it. Fox, when we first meet him, almost feels like a leader already. He's the one who comes up with the idea of summoning an audience, and he's the one who tells Badger to do it. We get that straight away from him, so we know that, and when he is appointed leader, it makes the most sense to us, and we agree to it. However, he does, even before being separated from his friends, show a lack of enthusiasm to be leader, which is understandable. Not only is the responsibility immense, but he's out of his comfort zone here. It's no secret that given the opportunity, Fox could and would eat every single one of the train, and, well, that's what he does. That's his life goal and his life purpose. He hunts. But he sees the danger and the verity of the situation probably more than anybody there, so he immediately agrees to the oath and knows that it's his responsibility to lead them out of the danger, and so he does that to the best of his ability. And that's what made him want to get his friends out of danger. However, when he first meets Vixen, obviously he admits that being a leader has been a nuisance. He also admits that he hasn't been hunting in a while. That's the thing about Fox. While he has trouble being a leader, he never at any point after he's appointed his role has any trouble believing that he is a leader or has any second thoughts on his decisions. He is, for every definition of the term, a brave leader. While it is a bit of an obvious comparison, he's actually a lot like Fox McCloud from Star Fox. He's headstrong, a little impulsive, but brave, a team player, and he's always ready to enter dangerous situations, and more for others more than himself. This makes him a compelling character. His ways that he does things and almost decides to not ever consider his own safety makes him compelling and very, well, maybe not relatable, but definitely someone we want to keep watching. And after he meets Vixen, we get to see more of his carefree and emotional side to him, and this makes us root for him even more, since he now has more to lose if he does fail, but he never once tries to stop helping others, and this makes Fox a great character, more than just a bland typical leader.
Oh, I'm getting too old for all of this.
Badger is definitely quite different from Fox. As we saw during the times when Fox was separated from his friends, he is definitely more friendly and aged, sort of acting like a father figure to the group, particularly to Weasel and Mole, and his age definitely puts him into being almost restrained and rather rigid in his pursuits. But his determination and almost limitless patience is very commendable, and I consider it rather endearing. However, sometimes his more grandfatherly nature does make him out to be not quite as effective as Fox. And while he does try to be his best as a second-in-command leader, and even as surrogate leader when Fox is missing, but his more gently nature and lack of trying to be more aggressive or headstrong like Fox does show him to be that he was not best fitted to be leader, but his ability to lead them through dangers they face, albeit not quite in one piece, shows that he was able to take the position in a time of crisis, just not quite as well. Also, his budding relationship with Fox, slight, almost marital-like quarrels with Owl, fatherly protectiveness over Mole, and strictness towards Weasel and Adder show how connected he is to the group and why it was him to call the audience, and how he can be relied upon as a second-in-command. Overall, while he does go through some character development even after Fox comes back, the elements are set in place for his major development next series, and that the character that he is still makes him very likeable and enjoyable to see.
Fox couldn't lead a pack of hounds.
Owl is definitely a great contrast to the other main characters. She has a lot of wisdom and is constantly the bearer of common sense amongst the group, but her arguably pretentious and pompous nature, mixed with her own self-righteousness, makes her a very Avon or Hartnell Doctor Who sort of character. Now, with a personality like that, there's a lot of potential for her to be unlikable, but to me, she is much like those other two characters I mentioned, where they're so charismatic, and because a lot of the time they actually are right, it makes them really enjoyable to watch. A lot of shows have that capability, where they introduce a character that you know you should hate, but the performance and the achievements that the characters have make you root for them. Blackadder, Basil Fawlty, Nathan from Misfits, Joy from My Name is Earl, and so on. All of these characters, including Owl, are made to be liked despite their giant personality flaws, and it works. But Owl does have some deeper levels to her early on. Her discussions with Adder, even if they are discarded eventually in the main narrative, shows her true feelings in how she essentially considers herself wasted as a potential leader, and that she feels that she is above everybody else. But she doesn't care to fly off because she needs the others' help, though she's too proud to admit it. And her wavering on whether she would disregard the oath or not is an interesting character element. But her snarky comments and berating of the other characters is always enjoyable to see. Plus, like Fox says, they really would be lost without her, but she would fare poorly as a leader. As while she has great knowledge and wisdom, her lack of experience, compassion, and ability to withhold responsibility does bring her down, but she has proved her worth by giving the group many great bits of advice, even if her sayings do get a bit grating at times.
This is the life, mateys!
Toad is the complete opposite of Owl. He's kind, extremely optimistic, friendly, energetic, which is surprising given both his age and the amount of travelling he's done, and slightly big-headed, but every time it gets the better of him, he suddenly gets a comeuppance, unlike Owl. Much like Owl, though, his knowledge of where White Deer Park is instrumental to the journey, and does make him extremely important. A shame that sometimes, though, that other animals like Owl, Hare and Adder seem to always be in lack of faith around him, but it does make sense. When there's only hope in the distance and the person who can get you there doesn't quite know what to do, it would piss you off. And it puts enormous pressure on Toad, especially when his homing instinct kicks in. So he naturally comes to be rather saddened whenever he lets the group down, which shows his dedication and his enthusiasm to help his friends, and he does normally come out at the end of it with a little help from them. But other than that, there's not much else to say about him. He's a nice character to watch, and you do root for him, and his personality makes him fun to be around, but there's not much else other than that, really. For this series, anyway.
I'm no use to anybody.
Mole is much of the same in terms of his development. He has a cute personality, he's shy, impish, somewhat greedy, and always feels like a burden. But his character doesn't branch out more than that. Really, the whole element of his character is that he does feel like a burden on the rest of them. He's obsessively friendly towards Badger, he cries at the fall of the pin, and he wants to be more involved, but he can barely see anything in daylight, and he moves slower than Adder does on dry land, and sadly, he knows that. Also, he says how he's always the slowest of them all, and so do the other animals, but he can tunnel so fast that I think even Hare would have trouble catching him if he was to tunnel under the ground, so I don't even know what the problem is. I've said that several times before. Regardless, he's just a strong supporting character, and he sort of provides the cuteness element to the younger kids, so on those notes, he's an enjoyable ball of fluff. I just wish he could go further with his character in this series, especially considering what happens to him in the next one.
Might as well shout it from the treetops. The animals of Farthing Wood are coming!
Okay, this is a part that I knew I had to get to at some point. My full disclosure on my opinions about Weasel. And I have to say, with her constant insults to the other characters, her voice, and her incessant cackle, there's only one thing I have to say about Weasel. I actually kinda like her. Yeah, no joke, I think Weasel can be a little funny sometimes. Granted, she's annoying, not all of her jokes are actually funny, and her voice, while funny at times, does come to be a bit annoying in and of itself if prolonged to it too much. Her cynical moments of banter and her not give a hell attitude about everyone around her can be legitimately funny, and the way that she can laugh at horrible things regardless of the situation, that's actually rather funny too. She's like a vermin female Dr. Hibbert, although that laugh can get pretty annoying on its own as well. She's one of the few characters that I don't feel any needs of any character development in this series. She's just the, well, as the Terminator put it, levity in the fear of death. She can be funny, and so she just fills the role of the comic relief for the most part, and on her more restrained moments she is likeable, though if I have to hear her sing again I'm going to have Weasel as my pet Badger's dinner.
I'd eat that if it was on 4 legs. Or even 2.
Adder. Oh, Adder, what a can of worms there. Adder is like if you took Owl's personality and took it to the extreme, and instead of being her charisma that brings us back, it's the fact of how much of a malicious character she is. Her character is the ultimate devil's advocate. She's constantly complaining, threatening to eat the other characters, tricking the other characters, and acting as the devil on their shoulders sometimes, especially to Owl, who is the character that she interacts with the most. And she's the most defiant of the characters, meaning that she constantly hides her true emotions. However, while we love her for all of those things, this series has shown that there's a more softer side to her that will come out in the later series. Like how she saves Vixen from the hunt, even though, like I said, it doesn't really make any sense why she would do that, because she'd never met Vixen before, and she doesn't show any sign of caring that she would make it back to Fox or not. But the act alone shows that she can be more caring and heroic. The other is when she's too scared to be lifted up by Whistler, and that does make sense. If there's any character who's closest to the ground other than Mole, it's Adder, so her fear is natural, but her pride is ultimately what gets the better of her, and she refuses to admit her real feelings, much like Owl does. But this is just foreshadowing for later events. For now, she's just one slithery, conniving serpent, and we love her for it.
Such restraint, to protect the weaker animals you would normally hunt, and to lead them on a journey.
Vixen, like I said, has become a fan favourite, and I can't deny that I love her character too. There's just something about her that makes her really likeable, but then again, she doesn't do anything that would make you not want to like her. She's constantly brave, much like her mate, very caring and has a motherly quality to her, and she's arguably less selfish than her mate, despite the way they agreed to be together in the first place, and her voice acting is perfect. Her character, despite being a gender counterpart, which this show has a history of not quite doing very well, stands out a lot from a lot of those other kinds by being just as smart and as brave as any of the other characters, and she fits perfectly into the group when she joins. And I really like the element of her character in that she decides if she wants to live a life of freedom or settle down and have a family. It's not often that kids shows, or many shows in general, would address an element of a relationship like that, but this did. Even though the way she decides is rather simple, though it does lead to one of the most exciting elements in the show's run. Speaking of which, because Vixen was a newly introduced character, when she was in danger at first, we don't know whether or not she will survive, which is actually a clever move, especially since many characters that were introduced to the group would die in this episode that they were introduced in, so I commend the show for that. Plus, Vixen is just one of those characters that you enjoy to see, which is a good thing because her role only gets bigger as the show goes on.
What I say is, it's up to us birds.
I've talked about Whistler to great lengths over the previous episodes, and I have mentioned that he's my favourite character in the series, so there's not much to say here other than, despite a lack of character development, which is understandable considering he was only in a few episodes, he's very charming and a kind character and has that natural pertwee factor that makes him a very magnetic character, so it's hard not to like him in my opinion.